guest this morning, Reverend Dr. Frankie Timmers. She's a soul sister of mine, as you all hear me say that when they come home. You see her shaking her head. Uh, we've had many, many fun times together. Just being in the presence of not only each other, but the presence of spirit doing its thing through us. We have lots of mutual friends, and Reverend Dr. Frankie is the spiritual leader, spiritual director of the Center for Spiritual Living, Morristown, New Jersey. She's been in this philosophy and faith and way of life since 1982. So I was reading your bio and I realized you and I entered this teaching the same year. And you've been on such a journey. You've been a minister since 1987, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you bring such a light to this teaching. And when you became a minister, you brought this new light of looking at things through certainly a more Eastern philosophy, certainly through a lot of the study of Rumi and various other spiritual philosophies, right? So, what a joy. So, it's so great to have you here on this day of love, Reverend Dr. Frankie.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to be visiting CSL-LA. What a way to do it, right?
Right. Just a fantastic way to do it, to say the least, to say the least. So, the theme for today is let love lead the way. And Jamie just sang about that as well. And I know that that is the way that you live your life. I know I've witnessed that. I've been in the presence of that. It's what you teach. And you also don't, my experience of you is that that's not just a philosophy. It's an actual applicable way that you go through your life. And you do that not just from a spiritual perspective, but you do that in that way that we all envy you, not all, but many of us envy you, and that great love of your life of Norm that you've attracted into your life. Look at her. So, can you talk to us a little bit this morning about what love means to you and how you show up in life as this expression of love?
Yeah, I realized at one point or another in our teaching that to let love lead the way is the only option. Because I realized to let fear lead the way just doesn't freaking work. And even though a part of me slips into that, even still, where I catch myself unconsciously lost in fear or anxiety or worry, whatever it is. And I forget that that's my commitment to let love lead the way. So, more and more, I think the more we practice the commitment of letting love lead the way, the more quickly we shift.
Yes,
So, for me, that has been an important vision in all areas of my life, health, and even like when I have a health challenge, it's I listen to love. If it's relationship, if it's a career or vocation, if it is uh, wealth or abundance, that's the intention. And I think when we keep it really simple, then we don't stay in all the other stuff so long. Does that make sense?
absolutely. Absolutely. And so, the quote that I would throw with us on this, because I hear you and I completely embrace that idea of letting love be the way, letting it lead us. And personally, it's been one where I have had to meaning choose to remember that there are many different facets of love as I process that as a human, and yet there's only one way of love from a spiritual perspective, and that the essence is only one essence, right? And so then as we all continue to move on this journey of spiritual awakening, right, that it's hard not to judge oneself when you find yourself in fear, right? And so this path by this quote by this gentleman Barry Gillespie, which I think speaks to this, and it's been really prevalent in my life the last week, is the path of spiritual awakening isn't a straight line; it's a spiral. You continually come back to the things you thought you understood and see deeper truths, right? And what that means to me, and I'll look forward to hearing what it means to you, is that we're not returning back to the same things. We're returning back to an experience of something in life, but being able to view it through a different lens or a different truth or a different space of awakening.
Yeah, I love that quote. And what comes to my mind is that as human beings, we tend to think of love in a more conditional way, even though it's not maybe always conscious. And I love what one of my teachers says, that we all live in the ocean of love. And because the ocean of love is infinite, nobody is closer to the shore than anyone else. So the idea is that if love is infinite, then there's always more room in our hearts to embrace it and to live it. There's not an ending. It's not like when I meet my perfect partner, then I'll be love, or when I heal, then it will be. No, it's an ongoing journey. So the aspect of that leads me is to remember that love is all there is. I am love. God is love in me and through me, and it is infinite. So there's always more room for me to embrace it. And so then I have to be compassionate with myself, because it's
Mhm.
not about perfection. It's just about feeling that. And I think when you and I met, you probably don't remember this. I kind of don't, but I do know that 30 years ago, I did not love myself,
Uh-huh.
and I didn't even know it. And it was this teaching that kind of made me see that, because I wasn't taught that. I wasn't taught much about love. I was born and raised in the Netherlands, and nobody even ever said, I love you. I didn't even know those words. They still sound weird in Dutch. So it's a cultural thing. And so spirituality has, and that's what I talked about this morning, has allowed me to have a love affair with the divine within me, and to have the divine court me and have a love affair with me. And that's the dance. That's what shows up in my world.
That's very Rumi-esque, very Sufi. I love it. Yeah, well, of course, that's who you are, baby girl. That's who you are. You let it out. So the thing that you just said that I resonate so with is about being compassionate, because for me, to break the word down, compassion means with passion, right? And passion, if you break it down, is pass I on, right? So what we're really being called to then is to live with the awareness that and the intention of passing the divine on, right? Which then is an outer reflection of Holmes' definition of love, which is the self-givingness of spirit whose desire to create more of itself out of itself in terms of creation, which is you and which is me. But for that to happen, we must constantly be fine tuning our understanding and expression of love, right? So I'm a huge fan of Dr. David Hawkins, and his quote around love is this: love is misunderstood to be an emotion. Actually, it's a state of awareness, a way of being in the world, a way of seeing oneself and others. And what I've learned for myself is that the more and more I love myself, not solely in that human emotional state, but from that awareness of letting the divine out to dance and play, and to be open to that journey, whatever that journey is, right? To try not to judge the journey, to be open to the journey, then I create more space in my world to engage in the physical and the eros state of love, right? Because then I'm coming at it from a place of being fulfilled, as opposed to seeking for fulfillment in others and hoping that that awakens something in me so that I know who the hell I am, right? So it's like it's that you flip it on its end, know who I am first, express love, and then that is how I will be able to engage in those other aspects of love as a whole being.
Yeah. And, when you think about relationships, if we think that a relationship is going to fill us up, you know, that's an interesting journey, right? Is even in relationship, it's always spiritual practice. It's
Right.
always calling us back to ourselves to heal what wants to be healed, to expand that energy of love inside of us, And then to share that with another. And I mean, I said this morning too, barring abuse, of course, because then we move on, we leave. It just becomes a way to open to the divine love within, but to expand that view and that experience of love.
Yeah. So you brought up a term. Sorry, I'm pouring myself tea. You brought up a term that is. Oh, I've got water too. But you brought up a term that I like to explore, and I'd like for us to explore it, of spiritual practice. Being that you and I both are mid to late or the latter part of the 20th century students of science of mind. I'll speak for myself and then hear what you have to say about it. I was taught that spiritual practice meant that you stopped what you were doing and you did spiritual mind treatment. End of story. Right. And so, right, which for me always, it was so much pressure. Like, I mean, oh my God, there's such pressure to have to do that. Right. And also you then had to know how to do it. And is it 5 steps or 7 steps or 11 steps or 3 steps? Like that. Right. So what I've learned and what I like to teach is that spiritual practice is practicing your spirituality. That's what it is. And there's an infinite amount of ways to do that, one of which is spiritual mind treatment, right? But there are many other ways to do that. And like in the class I'm teaching right now, one of our role responsibilities or our homework is to just stop and keep a journal of where we see light differently, right? Or where we now see love differently or feel power differently. Just stop and see it. So, what are your thoughts on spiritual practice?
Oh gosh, I'm laughing because yes, we were raised in this fundamental way of doing science of mind, and I'm actually returning to that. But there's so much that has been added onto it. Life is a spiritual practice. In a way, it's like I'm never in not in spiritual practice, unless maybe when I go unconscious. So my spiritual practice can be while I'm vacuuming or doing the dishes or taking a shower. But I think spiritual practice is about just being aware of the breath, being aware of what we feel and what we think. It can be meditation, which I think is a very important part of our spiritual practices. What I teach, and you're familiar with this too, is the main five spiritual practices, which is spiritual mind treatment, which is affirmative prayer, meditation, visualization, visioning, and affirmations. But it's even more than that. It's the breath. It's experiencing silence and communing with the divine. All that is spiritual practice, and it's so personal. And I think it's important to choose one or two and just really dive in deep and not just stay on the surface.
I couldn't agree with you more. I have grown to learn in my life that it's important to expand my understanding always. Deepak Chopra tells us all that we have is our awareness, right? And some of the first steps is to just know that all that we have is our awareness of our awareness, right? And so as we go through life, I'll speak for myself, it's if I'm looking to spiral upwards, David Hawkins, into a higher framework of consciousness, which is a state of vibrational frequency, right? Then the only way that I can do that is by emitting emitting that frequency, right? So it's really up to me as to how I want to give of what I am. But for me to give of who and what I am as a divine being, I have to open up to that, right? So I have to be willing to receive that which is within me, ridding myself of anything that's contrary to it, and then let it back out. That's the key of staying in that flow. So as you say, we're always in spiritual practice. Yes, we are always in that practice of our spirituality magnifying, manifesting itself, right? But it's even more expanded, if you will, if we're doing that through an awareness of our awareness of who we are.
Yeah, and if you think about the times that we live in, how about the times that we live in is a gift? Because it slowed us down. It made us stop dead in our tracks. That's not a nice way of saying it because it's not a loss. And that needs to be heart opening. That needs to, I love the saying, a broken heart is an open heart. We're so afraid of heartbreak. But when it's broken, it's open, and we can let love lead the way. We can let the love flow so that we then become instruments of the divine. And that's our service to humanity. So I think the whole pandemic is really about the universe saying, stop, just stop and sit still and stay home and don't get so distracted and just be with you and explore and experience your own divinity. And then we can still be of service. It doesn't have to be out there, it can be in a prayerful way. So it's really looking for the gift and looking for the opportunity to become more aware of the power and the presence of love within us.
So true, you just gave us a gift of saying that while we're at home, be choose to give in the way of letting your divine out, right? That's really being it through the 5 steps, right? So, which are spiritual mind treatment, meditation, visioning, affirmations, and visualizing, right? Imagination. So that really lines up with our philosophy and our faith and our way of life. As we were talking about our class this week of, I was recently with a client who was having a real difficult time trying to understand that the work that we're doing of healing together can actually transpire when we're not in the same room, right? And so I was saying I understand that I understand that challenge of understanding it, and yet it's the very premise of what we teach, in the sense that we are not bound by geography. And so where we're connected is transcendent of all of that. And so when we're now experiencing the pandemic and all of the other challenges that's taking place in the world right now, to then move into healing and really not only use the time, but to use a greater understanding of the impact that we can have by tapping into our divine nature and connecting to God, right? And even if we don't like that word, change the word.
Yeah.
Change it. I came across a quote when preparing for today with you that my teacher, one of my teachers, who I know that you loved very dearly, David Walker, um, used to say, and he would say this a lot, and he loved saying this, was, don't tell God how big your problems are, tell your problems how big God is. Right? And that was always so fun to hear coming from him as a big guy, right? Who was also very fundamental in this teaching, and almost a fundamentalist around this teaching. Speak to us a little bit about that concept of telling your problems how big your power is, your God is.
Oh God, yes, I love that saying. I think that for me, when challenges happen in my life, the tendency is to shrink. Ernest Holmes says the human tendency is towards the negative. And I think it's important to remember that, because that also says that there's something else. That means that my spiritual, my spirit, my soul's tendency, my higher power, whatever we call it, is towards the opening, the infinite possibility. So when I face a challenge in my life, and mind you, this does not happen instantly, sometimes it can take a while. But I now know, it's programmed in my mind. I now know that when I am negative, which I find a very limiting word, so I use unskillful, scared, worried, anxious, all those experiences, those feelings that are so human and so natural and healthy if we work with them, when we,
Right.
right, when we bring love in, is that just means it's my growing edge. When I bump into an issue in my life, it's like, oh, this is my growing edge. There's something for me to learn. There's something for me to get. There's something for me to awaken to. I recently have been going through some things in my life where I decided I'm going to freaking be done with fear. I don't know why it took me so long, but it's because it happens in layers, right? And so the only fear I really want if a bear is chasing me in the woods, or a deer, whatever, right? So I just really made a commitment to radical faith. And I've been working with this idea. So when the fear pops up, I went, wait, no, no, wait. I decided radical faith. So, and then just the other day, just keeping that commitment, I started to feel a joy I haven't felt in a while. And I thought, oh, where did that go? What was that? And then I realized that's all I want. I
Yeah.
just experience being in the present moment and feel the joy of being alive, being connected to spirit, and savoring the present moment. So it's that constant, that being in constant wander and not surrendering to that which is our human tendency.
I love that. The radical faith. So, what that means then is that just with the deepest of convictions, almost cannot be touched, living with faith, right? And I love that. The acronym that I love for faith is full assurance in the heart.
Ah,
Ah, right. So, faith is living, she wants to write that down, full assurance in the heart. And so, it's it's having the deepest of convictions, right? That heart, as the symbol of love, is that what we're really called to do, as we began this conversation, is to have love lead the way, right? So that when, just as in A Course in Miracles says, there's either love or fear, right? So you either, if you feel the fear, then dive into that love. You stated in what you were just saying was about then going to that. You said your growing edge, I believe that you called that. I had a coach and a teacher for years that would say, you want to live on the leading edge, not the bleeding edge. And yet, based on what you were just saying about living in the experience of pain and growth, right? Even sometimes the bleeding edge is okay because what we've all experienced is that after the blood is the healing, right? Now, we don't want to bleed to death, but a little blood is okay from that context, right? It's okay to understand that when we see blood, we have radical faith that it's going to stop, or that we will find a mechanism for that to stop, and our body will begin to heal itself, right? So why do we not have that same faith in our mind, right? In our soul, in our spirit? Because we know it will. How do we know it will? Because it's never, ever, ever failed us. Because it never will, because that's not its nature, right? And so what we're here to do is to remember that that's not its nature. It can't do that, right? So then we're called to approach it on our journey, no matter where we are, from a more mature perspective, day by day by day by day, right?
oh God, I love what you're saying. And it's it's knowing that we get to have compassion for that human nature. And for me, one of the things that is my growing edge too is to not try to figure it all out.
Right.
We want to know all of it, how it's going to unfold, what the future is going to be, how it resolves itself. But many times what I'm learning is that I'm only given the next step and I can't skip that, because then if I skip letting the paper cut or whatever the wound heal, then it gets infected, right? So it's kind of like really being in the present moment, trusting the divine and knowing that you will be given the next step. Because anytime, like you're saying, we look back, we say, oh, it's been happening all along and I trust it. So yes, it's knowing that that power that uses us, that we use, is the same as in nature. I always talk about the utter predictability of the seasons. I am sure that spring is going to come next. It's not going to be fall. So how can I know that utter intelligence and predictability within me? And that's the journey, isn't it? We forget, we remember, we forget, we remember. And I think as we grow into our spiritual practices, the forgetting happens less often and it doesn't take as long. It gets shorter.
Well, that's maturity. I have this quote here that talks about the journey, and the quote is maturity has nothing to do with physical age. It comes through two facets, experience and revelation, right? So the revelation that you're sharing about spring coming is that you know deep within you, not only is the season coming, but you also know that underground right now in the darkness, the roots are taking hold to that manifestation that's going to come through. That's the same thing for you and I and every one of us relative to the things we desire to experience in life, is to claim that those roots are taking place. I like to use the quote that inherent within every seed, inherent within the seed of intention is the fulfillment of its desire. And so we're just called to place the intention for the thing that we desire to experience in life and then stick with that through faith, right? It will, in that darkness of creation, it has those parts of the roots taking root have to take place. It has to get grounded for it to burst through the soil so that then the plant can grow so that the flower can blossom, right? All of that is a requirement for that fulfillment. And so we're all called for that. We're called to be a part of that. And that's the same thing with our body. This other quote is every cell in your body is eavesdropping on your thoughts. I love your face there.
Well, because I love that one. It's so confrontational. It's like, okay, but can I then say, oh, interesting, instead of, oh, you
Right.
know, Keith, I want to read a little poem that I read this morning because it reminds me of what you were saying, because we don't really think about what it's like for the seeds underground.
Right.
I don't know what it's like for my tulip bulbs out front, but I know it's probably not so much fun, for a seed or a bulb to crack open and be in the darkness and be cold, but it needs that in order for it to blossom.
Yeah.
So there's an aspect of that that's really intense. So can I read a poem by Hafez?
Yes, please. Please do.
So this is a very graphic poem, but I love it because I was talking to my prayer partner this week when I was struggling with something, and I went, I keep thinking about that poem and I forget what it's called, and I remember this line, and so I looked it up and I found it, so I decided to share it this morning in our celebration. So here it is. It's by Hafez, who's a 14th century Persian poet. Tired of speaking sweetly, it's called. Love wants to reach out and manhandle us, break all our teacup talk of God. If you had the courage and could give the beloved his choice, some nights he would just drag you around the room by your hair, ripping from your grip all those toys in the world that bring you no joy. Love sometimes gets tired of speaking sweetly and wants to rip to shreds all your erroneous notions of truth that make you fight within yourself, dear one, and with others, causing the world to weep on too many fine days. God wants to manhandle us, lock us inside of a tiny room with himself, and practice his drop kick. The beloved sometimes wants to do us a great favor, hold us upside down and shake all the nonsense out. But when we hear he is in such a playful, drunken mood, most everyone I know quickly packs their bags and hightails it out of town.
I love that.
Isn't that great?
That is fantastic. That speaks to so many elements and components of A, radical faith, B, what we're here to do, and C, we're not called here to be pious during our spiritual journey. You know, we're called here to engage it and to live it and to um, enjoy both the darkness and the light, enjoy the fun and that which is not so fun, right? To play with it. You know, when I took this role as spiritual leader here, I made a commitment to myself that the entire thing, day by day by day by day, was going to be a spiritual experiment. Like it's going to be an experiment to play with everything that we teach here. Um, so that poem says it all for us.
It does. And you know what? I don't know anybody who doesn't go through life where they sometimes feel like God is grabbing you by the hair and dragging you through the woods. Well, I feel drop kicked, or what do they call that? Yeah, drop kicked. Once in a while.
Yeah.
You know, it's I love the humor of it. I mean, that's why I can't even get through it without laughing because it's so funny to me.
Oh, of course not. Yeah, it requires humor because, you know, if we're going to go back to those old school aspects of the qualities of God, joy is one of them, right? So we got to remember that. And joy is not just sitting back with white gloves on, clapping in appreciation. It's diving in. You know, it's living life like that, and it's also letting yourself being dragged by the hair by the divine through whatever your experiences is. You know, the last little quote I'll share with us to close on is I have this little book that my dear friend Rachel Hobray gave me called Buddha Doodles. And it's like these little doodles, right, from the Buddha. And this one is obstacles are opportunities for new adventures. So, right, you know, it's all about just opening up our mind to choose differently. And that poem says it all. As do you. You know, my favorite quote of Ernest Holmes of all time is Spirit has placed the stamp of individuality upon itself and called it you. Dr. Frankie Timmers, you are such a delight and such a light into this world. Thank you for being who you are and for shaking things up in the way that you did and in life the way that you do. You know, as when I first encountered you at the Centers for the Church of Religious Sciences, whether you knew that you loved yourself or not, you were definitely a radical being there. And I resonated with that as I still do. And I know that our community does as well. So thank you, thank you, thank you, my dear.
Thank you for having me. It was such a pleasure. And I love you, Keith Cox.
I love you too, Frank.